Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the kickoff of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Solutions Summit. Today, we are releasing a set of proposals we have called Coming Together to Support Workers and Families, a Pragmatic Agenda for the New Congress. The document is not simply a series of what we think are good policy ideas, but it's also a reflection of the core values and commitments that animate the work of the BPC. We believe and support pragmatic leaders who have the courage to prioritize helping people today over some effort to try to build political capital for a theoretical battle in the future. We believe the best policy is forged by a constructive collision of ideas among principled people who reflect the diversity and the real differences that exist in our country. And we know that durable policy requires compromise, as neither political party has the legitimacy or the mandate to govern alone. These ideas and the very premise of American democracy are being put to the test by a nation facing crises in public health, in our economy, and in our capacity to solve problems. For the next 5 days, we are going to explore ideas that we believe President Biden and a divided Congress can successfully act on early next year. We are going to focus on helping children and families. We're going to spend a day looking at incentives to support work and expand opportunity. We're going to spend another day talking about promoting financial resilience and creating wealth. And at the end of the week, we are going to have a discussion about the racial inequities that have been laid bare and amplified by the pandemic. Our focus on working families does not detract from BPC's commitments to healthcare, energy and climate policy, immigration, infrastructure, or fiscal policy. But we believe that a focus on the issues facing Americans today can not only help millions of people, but it can also begin to restore the faith that we can have a government that can solve our problems. One of the many great things about American democracy is that each new Congress and president start off the season undefeated. Our leaders have a really difficult choice to face. They can either continue emphasizing their differences, or they can do the harder and I think braver work of compromising to advance the nation's interests. We are here to promote the fierce urgency of pragmatism, and there's a lot of work to do. So it is a delight to welcome you all today and to begin our first discussion. So we're just incredibly fortunate to be able to kick off our Solutions Summit with two of our nation's most effective public servants. We are delighted to be joined by Governors Hutchinson and Gretchen Whitmer. Governor Hutchinson was first elected in 2014, began his term in 2015. He's apparently pretty good at it because he was reelected in 2018 with 2/3 of the popular vote. He also has tremendous experience across many aspects of government. He was a congressman representing the Arkansas 3rd District. He led the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. He was an undersecretary at DHS. He is now the incoming vice chair of National Governors Association. And I will just note that Governing Magazine described his leadership as based on patience and pragmatism, which really kind of resonates with the experience we've been having in Washington for the last few years. So we're delighted to have that conversation. Governor Whitmer became governor in 2019. She has served quite a while at different roles in state government. She was in the House of Representatives for 2001 to 2006 and in the Michigan State Senate for several years from 2006 to 2015, where she also was the first female leader of the Democratic Party. Governor Whitmer has demonstrated some remarkable grace under pressure in the last several months. These have been tough weeks, I think, for all of our states, but as I think all of you know, Michigan's really been in the crucible of that discussion. And so we are just delighted and appreciative that you could take some time to share what's happening in your states and give us a little bit of your view about what we can do here in Washington to advance the interests of the real people, many of whom are really suffering right now. So we're going to focus on the working family agenda that the Bipartisan Policy Center has just released. We think this is really the opportunity to get some quick wins and motivate the democracy to start to solve some big problems. But before we start to focus on the economic issues, I think we have to start off with the fact that the pandemic is still wreaking tremendous havoc and creating tremendous risk for many Americans. And I'd love, governors, just to ask you to start off, maybe you, Governor Whitmer, how's it going? What's the state of Michigan in early December? And How are you feeling about the capacity of the hospitals and everything else just to deal with the crush of this really challenging disease?
Well, we're very seriously concerned. I mean, I think that the news of vaccines is reason to give all of us great hope and requires an incredible amount of work that states are at the forefront of and need to be. And yet we haven't gotten enough of the resources, in my estimation, from Washington in order to execute in terms of this administration of the vaccine when it becomes available. I'd also add that with coronavirus, Michigan was hit very hard early on, and we took actions. They were aggressive, and we really pushed the spread of coronavirus down. We saved thousands of lives, mitigated the harm on our economy, and Michigan boasted one of the 10 best economic resurgences in the country for many months. But we also know that the experts were telling us that this virus was going to come back with a vengeance in the fall when the temperatures plummet and it coincides with flu season. And that's what we're seeing all across the country. And certainly here in the Midwest, we are seeing some very serious numbers. Our hospitalizations are up. We've seen, the nation post record numbers many days in a row now. And so this is a very concerning moment. There's light on the horizon, but right now, here in this moment, with the holidays exacerbating some of the spread, we're very concerned about where things are and trying to do what we can on the state front to mitigate the spread of COVID.
So, Governor Hutchinson, you, like so many of your colleagues, are grappling with these dual challenges of finding ways to make sure that your citizens are protected and at the same time recognizing that we have to have an active economy because poverty is also a tremendous public health challenge. And so just talk a little bit about the challenge that you've had in trying to kind of balance those two competing opportunities and obligations.
Well, thank you. And it is good to be with Governor Whitmer, and thank you for this opportunity. When it comes to the challenge that we currently face, we've had a record number of cases yesterday. Our deaths continue to go up. All of Arkansas is pulling together to try to reduce the spread, to control this. But, the love of family and getting together is a challenge for everybody. And so it's about making sure we have adequate hospital space. We're working very hard on improving the coordination of our hospitals so that we do have adequate space. And we're not in a position in Arkansas that we're building field hospitals, but we're looking to the future and know that as we enter into December and the Christmas holidays and get the post-Thanksgiving surge that everyone expects, that we have to be prepared for the eventuality that we're going to need additional ICU beds, hospital space. And so we're rising to meet that challenge. And it is a balance with businesses. Early on in the pandemic, we put in money to help, which are CARES Act funds, but we put those funds in to help our small businesses so they could survive with the additional restrictions. And so that went to those in the hospitality industry. It went to gyms and small businesses across the board. But that money has run out. And so now we're looking at, do you put people out of work when there's not this financial assistance to help the small business and the unemployed? And so I take it very seriously, the responsibility as governor to make sure we're on the right path from a public health standpoint, but not to overly restrict businesses if there's not the data that supports that. And so we're trying to achieve that balance. All of Arkansas is pulling together to accomplish that. It's not an Arkansas problem or a Michigan problem. It's a national problem that we see with the cases really going up in every state. So it's a time to pull together. We're doing that here in this state. I appreciate the federal assistance because that's going to help us to get the vaccine out, and everyone needs that for the hope of the future.
So you both made obviously important points about the need to have effective federal-state partnerships to take on these kinds of crises. Governor Hutchinson, you just used the term, pulling together. So in a few weeks, President-elect Biden is going to take the oath of office and be immediately met by a deeply divided country and a closely divided Congress. So I guess before we start really talking about policy, I wonder if you each might say a word about just what President Biden, Leader McConnell, and others need to do just to kind of bring together the fabric of the country and restore a little bit of the sense of shared purpose that has always helped our country in previous crises. Governor Whitmer, do you think it's possible? Can we get the country pulling in the same direction?
It absolutely is possible. I think that there are people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle that want to see that happen, and it's on all of us to do our part to make sure that we do. We are a deeply divided nation. I think this election has shown that, and yet what really binds us, I think, in most regards, is universal. We want good opportunities for us and better opportunities for our kids. We want to know that the drinking water is going to be safe when we turn on the tap and hand our child a glass of water at the dinner table, that we can travel safely on infrastructure that promotes a growing economy and the safety of individuals as we travel. I think that there are universal truths for families all across this country, whether they are in Arkansas or in Michigan. And leaders of both parties need to find that common ground. And I'll tell you, 2020 has been a challenging year, and that's the understatement of 2020. But one of the things that I have found most helpful and most inspiring is banding together with my fellow governors on both sides of the aisle. In the Midwest, I regularly have conversations with the governors of the Great Lakes states, and that includes my neighbor in Ohio and my neighbor in Indiana, both Republicans, as well as Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois, all Democrats. We have more in common than we have different. And I think when we actually focus on solving problems, we're going to be able to get a lot more done and get the confidence of the people of this country. And I am optimistic about President-elect Biden's ability to do that. His first speech after the election was confirmed was outreach to do just that, saying he'll be a president for all Americans. And I can tell you, I'm willing and ready and eager to do my part to help heal some of the divide that we have in this country. And I know that leaders like Governor Hutchinson, it sees a lot of the same things that I do here in Michigan, and I'm grateful for his leadership too.
So Governor Hutchinson, I think the election results, which I've described as a blue puddle, have clearly made the case that neither party has a mandate, right? There's a longstanding tradition in Washington of one party or the other winning by a few percent and asserting that it now has a mandate, to govern based on an election agenda, which was not designed, in fact, to represent the full country. I'm wondering, based on your experience, whether you think a closely divided Congress, whether these razor-thin margins are actually helpful or harmful to moving the country forward.
Well, regardless, the American people like divided power structure in Washington, where each side keeps an eye on each other. There's some checks and balances, and it's likely that that's what we're going to have. But regardless of the outcome of the Georgia elections, it's very important that the leadership under President-elect Biden is handled looking for bipartisan solutions. And I absolutely agree with Governor Whitmer that the governors have worked together, Democrats and Republicans, and exchange of information and ideas. There's been some differences, which is natural, but we've really come closer together as a result of this crisis that we all face. And in our nation's history, crisis has always been the vehicle that the American people have come together. And so now that the election is over, which did put some differences highlighted during the election, but now that that's over, we've got to come together, particularly with the crisis accelerating in terms of our cases and our deaths and the need for solutions and federal support. So there's a great opportunity for President-elect Biden. And I think it's important whenever you look at the Congress, whenever you look at President-elect Biden's leadership, that we don't overreach. And that's the temptation. If you just look at one party solution, you will overreach. But if you look for a bipartisan solution, then it's going to hit a sweeter spot that's going to have greater level of acceptance. And I applaud right now the Senate and the way they've come out with some bipartisan efforts to provide relief to the states. It's not what the Democrats want completely, and it's not what the Republicans want, but it is a compromise solution that's getting traction. And that's the kind of approach that we need next year in not just the coronavirus issues, but in a whole host of issues that it's going to build confidence of the American people if we can look for those bipartisan solutions.
So let's actually talk about this kind of urgency of this moment, even before we inaugurate a new president and seat a new Congress. About 13 million Americans are now relying on pandemic-related employment support. Millions of Americans are relying on the paid leave provisions that were put in to recognize that people have sick children and parents and to care for. This all runs out at the end of the month. And so Congress has seemingly awoken to this challenge in the last several days. But I ask you, Governor Whitmer, how much is on the line right now? And, how much interaction have you had that gives you either optimism or pessimism that Congress can, in fact, govern in crisis?
I'm really not great at predicting what's going to happen in Washington, and maybe Governor Hutchinson can give us a little more insight, having worked there at one point. But, this is a really hard moment across our country. There are a lot of people who are struggling, whether it's because they or a loved one has COVID-19, or it is because a loved one has, or because they've lost a job as a result of this pandemic and the recession that's accompanied it. It is a really hard moment, and we really do need Congress to get something done here in these last few days of this session. Our ability to build up the apparatus to disseminate and distribute vaccines. That work has to be done now. In fact, it probably should have been in the works for quite a while. And yet the resources to do that just aren't there. Every state budget in the nation has been devastated by this pandemic. And so we have a lot of work to do, but the most pressing concern right now is, of course, those who are unemployed, who have been counting on the assistance just to put food on the table and to keep a roof over their heads. And that's why I am hopeful that Congress will get something done. But I recognize that our challenge is great and that we will need to continue the work with the federal government so that we can help people get through this time. It's not going to last forever. This is, a moment in a much bigger story, but we need to rise to this moment and we need to help people who are struggling right now, because as vaccines come online, as we get through 2021 and more people get vaccinated, we will be able to resume a lot of these things that are so important and help us survive. But right now, people need some help. And I'm hopeful that Congress gets it done. In the event that they don't, I'm continuing to push here in Michigan with my legislature to try to get some assistance for the unemployed, because we can't have them run out on December 31st and not have anywhere to go, and while we're still in the midst of the worst days of this pandemic.
So, Governor Hutchinson, I mentioned that you are incoming vice chair of the National Governors Association. I believe you are sharing that leadership role with Governor Cuomo. And so just, if you express a little bit either on this question of what Congress needs to do immediately, or what are a couple of the imperatives that you think will have bipartisan gubernatorial support heading into next year?
Well, in terms of what the governors, I think, are most interested in is relief for our small businesses and those that have been most severely hit because of the pandemic. And there has been an economic divide. You have those that can work remotely, that their income has not been depleted. They continue to have their jobs, but the service industry, the hospitality industry, which are more in the lower income categories or middle income, the ones that have lost their jobs or they have been disrupted, the small businesses. So I think there is a consensus. That's the first priority that we need to address, and that's what I hope they can draw a bipartisan consensus to do. But there's many other opportunities, and some of it is giving the states more flexibility over existing CARES Act funding. There's obvious some needs in education that's been adversely impacted because of the pandemic. Whenever you look at our healthcare system and the continued higher rate of federal sharing of our Medicaid expenses. That needs to be continued. Those are things that, to me, are something everybody can agree upon and ought to be done very quickly. And I think the larger debate is going to be on the price tag. That's where you're going to have divide. Some of the states have not been hit to the same level in terms of their budget and their hit to their budget as other states. And they've all managed it differently. And so that's going to be a difference. And we've got to figure out a solution, and that's where you're going to have to compromise, and not everybody's going to get exactly what they want. And that's where I mean by we can't overreach because there's going to be a lot of attention drawn to how we're spending ourselves into increased federal debt. So those, to me, are the ones that they ought to go for first, and then some of the more difficult areas that's going to take more work.
So, Governor, you're the first person who's mentioned the word debt in my company in the last several weeks. It's something we certainly do care about. I think the country is amassing an additional roughly $5 billion of debt every day, which I think leads many people, I'm sure the two of you, to believe we have to start as soon as we can to shift from just emergency triage to investment. And Governor Hutchinson, you have also said a lot about topics like rural broadband. Governor Whitmer, your assertion that we need to fix the damn roads was, I think, kind of metaphor, not just for infrastructure, but just for your view of how governors need to be practical. I want to talk about infrastructure a little bit, maybe start with you, Governor Whitmer. Bipartisan Policy Center thinks this is a real opportunity, that infrastructure is going to increase competition, it can increase clean energy, it can bring jobs. How are you thinking about that, both in Michigan, but also at the federal level?
Well, I think that's right. When I ran for governor, I spent 2 years traveling the state of Michigan, and Michigan's a big state. When you are in the capital city, you're as close to Washington, D.C. as you are to the western end of the Upper Peninsula. I mean, it's a big state. And getting into all 83 counties and listening to the people, I think it's important for anyone who's running for office, because that's when you learn what's really holding people back. What are people really worried about when they sit down to dinner? Fixing the damn roads was a slogan that I ran on, but it wasn't a slogan that we came up with or we poll tested or asked people how they felt about it. It's simply what people told me as I got around into all 83 counties of Michigan. Because when the roads are crumbling, it means money out of child care. It means money out of a retirement fund or rent. It is real when you have to fix the rims on your car or you have a busted windshield. This is the kind of thing that is holding working people back. And it's a visceral reminder that government is important and has a job to do on these fundamentals that benefit every single one of us. We have seen the need for broadband in this COVID moment, whether it's kids who are trying to learn online from a distance, or it is employees who want to continue working but want to do so safely from home for a variety of reasons. This is, I think, becoming a very crisp, needed investment all across the country. I know Michigan's not unique in that. And so this is something that I am very hopeful on. I have spent quite a bit of time speaking with the president-elect over the past year. I know how passionate he is about things from climate change to infrastructure. And I think that they do work together. To your question, I think you beautifully intertwine them because they are related. When we invest in smart infrastructure, it's an investment in our economy, it's an investment in our quality of life, and it's a way to ensure that we are doing it in a way that mitigates the harm that we're doing to our climate that is creating so many infrastructure issues in the first place. So this is, I think, space where hopefully we can find bipartisan support. I know during our meeting in Washington, D.C. last year with the National Governors Association, I was in a breakout session where we focused a lot on this issue. We really need to all get behind this because I do think that it would be a dramatic improvement in our ability to take care of our families and to get ahead in this country.
So, Governor Hutchinson, I want to stay on this for a moment. Infrastructure, it's the best idea that never happens, right? If you do the after action report from the first 6 months of the Obama presidency or the Trump presidency, a lot of people think they should have done infrastructure. So just talk a little bit, why are the politics still so hard there? And do you agree with Governor Whitmer that the pandemic may have shifted that? Does the fact that families are driving 30 miles to a McDonald's to download their kids' homework change the politics on this issue?
Well, it is one of the biggest surprises that in recent years, to me, the easiest lift was a bipartisan solution on infrastructure investment in our country, and it hasn't happened. I think part of the challenge is the funding sources and how much, but it's still a surprise. Now, I think you've got two opportunities in the future. One is a broad infrastructure funding bill that can go toward bridges and highways across our country, as well as other key points of infrastructure. And then you have, as Governor Whitmer talked about, the broadband issue. And that has been robustly funded at the federal level, and we're starting to put state money into it as well. In fact, I presented my budget to the General Assembly that allocated tens of millions of dollars to broadband, and their biggest question, why can't we put more money in there? Because the need has been so greatly emphasized through this pandemic. Whenever you have the schools in the rural area of the state that cannot do the virtual learning in the same way in other areas of the state that has better broadband access. And so that digital divide is real. And so there's a momentum for this. One thing I think is very important, that we do a better job of federal-state coordination. Right now, the federal dollars on broadband flow directly to the internet providers and the telecom companies that is doing the investment. And it bypasses the state, which is okay. But for example, we put one standard, a higher standard of broadband deployment in Arkansas that was higher than the federal standard. And then they moved some of the federal standards. So part of the in federal money is being invested at a lower standard. Some of it's being invested at a higher standard. It hasn't been coordinated with the states to the level it should be. There's a lot of money flowing out there, but we don't have very much visibility in it. So it's an opportunity both for increased investment, accelerating broadband deployment, but also better partnership with the state.
You are invoking the idea of collaborative federalism, which we have not had nearly enough of. So I know you both have day jobs and states to govern. I'd like to just pose one more question to each of you. And these are questions that actually have come to me from some of the folks who work with BPC in lots of different ways. Maybe ask Governor Hutchinson a question posed by Dan Glickman, who I know you know. Dan is a senior fellow at the BPC, and he wants you to respond to this question. Both of you govern states with large rural populations. Coming from Kansas and having served as Secretary of Agriculture, I'm deeply concerned by the intensifying urban-rural divide in this country. What actions can Congress and the administration or private sector take to promote rural economic vitality and recovery? Governor Hutchinson?
Well, it's a super question, and of course, Dan always poses a great question. Arkansas is an agricultural based state with a lot of other industry, but in terms of agriculture, I think the most important thing is how President-elect and the Congress approaches trade issues for the future. Whether you're in Kansas or whether you are in Arkansas, we produce more than we consume, and we have to have access to the global markets. And we've had some progress at opening up some of those markets, but we're behind the curve in our bilateral or multilateral trade agreements, and that puts American agriculture at a disadvantage. Our producers simply want access to markets. They can be competitive. And then I do regret the urban-rural divide in our country, and I'm not sure it's broader than just production and what we're doing for our farmers. It's sometimes a different way of thinking, a different way of emphasis, and our values. And I think we just have to have more dialogue and understanding. And I think we need to understand more of the urban culture, and likewise, the urban culture needs to understand, appreciate the importance of agriculture in our country.
Thank you. Governor Whitmer, a final question to you comes from David Clooney, who's the Executive Director of the Black Economic Alliance. And he asks, The health and economic consequences of the pandemic have exposed and amplified long-standing and deeply embedded racial inequities. How can we ensure that the resources that are allocated to counteract past inequities and build generational health will provide opportunities for all Americans? And I note that just yesterday, I believe, you released an interim report that's focusing on some of these questions in the state of Michigan. So how do you think about the challenge of building back in a way that is, just and provides opportunity for everyone?
Well, I'll start with this. I know that when I took office, it was important to me that we had a cabinet and leadership tables that really were representative. And so we intentionally leveled berries on the onset and have the most diverse cabinet in the history of the state of Michigan. And in doing that, it was Dr. Janae Caldoun, our chief medical executive, an African-American ER doctor. She was one of the first people in the nation to see the data and release the demographic information around COVID. Other states followed, and we saved a lot of lives here in Michigan, but I think that we recognized the disparate impact that COVID was having on communities of colors and the Black community in particular. That's what empowerment, that's what representation yields and looks like. Because of that work, we created the Task Force on Racial Disparities dealing with COVID-19, chaired by the Lieutenant Governor, who also is our first African-American Lieutenant Governor here in Michigan, Garland Gilchrist. They released their report. He and Dr. Caldoun are the co-chairs. There are a number of people on this task force, and it spans not just COVID-19, but of course, we're focused on the crisis now, but an agenda that is much more long-term, addressing a lot of the different longer issues that we have been confronting as a nation that has contributed to disparate outcomes in a variety of ways. And so we're going to use that to guide our work. I invite anyone who's watching to download that interim report. It's interim because we didn't want people to think that the task force is over and the work is done. We've got work yet to do, but we invite people to take a look at it, to learn from it, and to share other things that maybe we should be considering here in Michigan.
So, governors, just express my deep gratitude, first, really for your leadership and what you have been doing to protect and help your citizens over the last several months. Really generous of you to spend a little time helping to kick off our Solutions Summit. We are eager to do whatever we can to help leaders like yourselves who have the courage to collaborate. And I think it's going to be essential for states to be bringing that pragmatic spirit to the federal debate. And we just are delighted to have the opportunity to start this discussion with you and look forward to getting back together and working together early next year. So have a great day, and thank you again.
Great, thank you.
Well, it was really terrific to have that chance to talk with two of our nation's leading governors. We now have an opportunity that I am really looking forward to, which is to bring in two of my favorite people, John Delaney and Michael Steele. They have a lot in common. Both have represented the great state of Maryland. Both have suffered the slings and arrows of independent thought in pursuit of outcome. And I think, frankly, most important, they're both board members of the Bipartisan Policy Center. And we have the great benefit of an exceptional board who gives us tremendous guidance and support and works hard to help us move our recommendations into action. And so as we move forward next year with our solutions, we thought it would just be great to have two of our board members just, again, share some thoughts about where you think the country is and the ideas that we are working on that make you proud to be part of the BPC. So with that, I'm out. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate it, man. And it's a great pleasure to be a part of this Solutions Summit, which is an incredible array of talented speakers and policy proposals that I think are going to be important, certainly going forward over the next year, the early term for the incoming administration. And I'm excited to have this conversation with my man, John Delaney, who has represented our state admirably and well in the United States Congress. And so, John, it's great having you be a part of this, man. And I guess just to sort of get us started in looking at where we are and how these big ideas actually get granularized in a way. How do we begin to decide what the priorities are is something that the folks at the BPC are very much keyed in on and very much attuned to in trying to make it relevant, yes, make it important for all the players on Capitol Hill, guys like yourself who are going to be making these sort of legislative policy decisions. But then, you got to make it real for people. It's got to have an end result. It's got to be a part of an ongoing conversation. That's what I'm excited about when you come to the table with something like this. We get to do that, and we get to bring in Republicans and Democrats, people who typically are expected not to agree and not to find some sense of consensus. But in fact, given the space that we're in right now, the opportunity is there. How do you see it? How are you assessing as we turn into the new year, a new administration with big policy proposals from everything from infrastructure to childcare? How do you check it out?
Well, first of all, Michael, it is so great to be with you. You're one of my favorite people, and I always look forward to any opportunity to share a stage or share a video chat with you. And this BPC Solution Summit is just a great opportunity for that. And I'm new to the BPC board, but one of the things that I was most attracted about joining, in addition to my wonderful experience with BPC, was having the opportunity to serve with people like you on the board. So it's really great to be with you. I mean, I think we've got to take a step back and realize that we're at a moment in time where the things that you and I have been fighting for a long time, and Jason and his team have been fighting for a long time, is really upon us, which is this notion of bipartisan solutions, where you put forth common sense ideas, you find common ground, you look at data, and you try to make progress for the American people. Because this election clearly proved, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but it clearly reminded us that we are, in fact, a very divided nation. I mean, Joe Biden clearly beat Donald Trump, in my opinion, based on things like character and decency. But you could certainly make a strong argument that the Republican Party beat the Democratic Party once you went down the ballot there. So that's the reality of where we are. We've got a very divided government, at least it looks like that's what we're going to have. And so now it's time for us to put aside some of that partisanship and start finding solutions. And I think the American people get it, and I think the Congress gets it. And that's why we're seeing, some very positive signs, I think, coming out of Congress, where people who have always had this bipartisan headset are stepping forward and trying to be leaders in this conversation. Because, I used to talk with Elijah Cummings, the late, great Elijah Cummings, on the floor of the House all the time. And I would always say to him, Elijah, the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. And that was always in the context of us talking about Baltimore, how we haven't done enough for that city. And I think it's true for the whole country. This partisanship has prevented us from doing anything, and we've paid a huge cost, and American families have paid the huge cost. So we've got to deal with relief, obviously, but then we have to start focusing our attention on things that, help build a better future. And that's where BPC's agenda for working families, like expanding the earned income tax credit and, paid family leave, these are things that an overwhelming majority of the American people support. And I think they're going to get a lot of attention. That's at least my opinion. And I'm a bit of an optimist, but, that's what we really have to do.
Well, that's what I love about you, man. You are an optimist, and you were an optimist when you were in the minority, and you were an optimist when you were in the majority, and you are one of these public servants that recognizes the responsibility of public service. And that's why I thought starting our conversation and leading off our conversation with two, as Jason noted, two well-regarded, well-respected governors in Whitmer and Hutchinson, coming at these big policy questions, again, as governors, and have to do from a very granular level, because they know the ultimate impact it can have on American families and the families in their respective states. But we're at a point where the country doesn't necessarily have a clear mandate. You rightly set up this discussion by noting, Democrats took the White House, but Republicans grabbed a few seats back in the House. And the Senate, as we're having this conversation, is still a little bit up in the air. There's a little bit more play there. So it will begin to matter how leaders step into the moment to sort of, in that BPC way, in that bipartisan way, recognize what is required, mandate or no mandate. You're still going to have to govern. You're still going to have to recognize that the urgency of right now is real, and that states and the federal government have to reconcile themselves to an economic reality, a healthcare reality, and a social reality as you look at the impact of race and other issues that are also buffeting our neighborhoods and our communities. So a pragmatic focus on crisis is important, but is also a pragmatic focus on those things that are not necessarily in crisis, but still need to be dealt with. And that's where you have, the opportunity to sort of expand the conversation around job creation, wealth creation, how families realign themselves in this new environment. So as you mentioned, things like paid family leave and daycare related services become a real focus. Yeah, mom and dad are home with the kids now. They're looking forward to the day when they're like, okay, you're going back to school, I'm going back to work. And that infrastructure has got to be there. That infrastructure has got to be a big part of that. And I guess, John, one of the questions I would have is how much has this crisis that we are in right now revealed our weaknesses, and how do we kind of evolve ourselves through that, and how do we begin to deal with it? Because man, it's going to be everybody hunkering down in their corner. We don't want a repeat of what we saw in 2008 and 2009, where Republicans stood over here and the Democrats stood over there, and Barack Obama was trying to say, can we all just get along? Joe Biden doesn't have, or nor can he be afforded, that lack of opportunity there, because the crisis is not just an economic one in this case. It touches on all those other elements, like I said. So how our weakness has been exposed here, and how can what we're talking about here during this time with the Solution Summit begin to address some of that?
Well, and again, I think you're exactly right with all those comments, Michael. I mean, I think the mandate is to get things done. That's the clear mandate, I think, coming out of this election. At least that's what the way elected officials should look at it. And as you said, so many Americans are living and we're living on the edge. And we used to talk about it kind of as a statistic. 40% of the country can't afford a surprise $500 expense, all those statistics.
Right.
But COVID has really shined a spotlight on the reality of that, because so many Americans had very little cushion. And that's why, there is a mandate, I believe, for the government to provide relief to get us past this. Now, the good news is the vaccine news is very positive. While we're going to have a rough couple of months as this pandemic continues to surge, there is light on the end of the tunnel. There's got to be a lot of work in getting it implemented and getting people vaccinated. But so there needs to be a relief bill to stand us up until that happens. But the other thing that's going to come out of COVID is a lot of trends that were playing out over a long period of time have been accelerated. The transition to the digital economy, things like that, they were going to play out over 5 or 10 years, and it's all just been accelerated. And that's very disruptive for a lot of people. A lot of the jobs, it took like 20 years for there to be 11% of retail sales online, right? In 20 years, we got 11% of retail sales online. In the last 6 months, it's doubled to 22, right? So the disruption in the retail sector, for example, if you think about restaurants, how people are thinking differently about delivery and eating at home and all, it's changed everything. And there's going to be a lot of disruption. So the first mandate is to find common ground to get us through the crisis. The second mandate, in my opinion, is to find those solutions that support working families, because working families are going to have a hard time managing this post-COVID world that's changed. It just happened. It's happening too fast. And that's why BPC's proposal on the earned income tax credit which is like the best policy with the worst name, or their proposal on paid family leave or, supporting housing. These are all good ideas. They're rooted in facts, and they actually have a lot of bipartisan support. So there should be a mandate for those kind of things. And then finally, there's got to be a mandate about our future, about how do we start allocating dollars away from relief, which we have to do, but doesn't have a long-term return on its investment from an economic perspective. And how do we start shifting to things like infrastructure, right, which we know have an enormous kind of return to the economy? And how do we launch the infrastructure program we need? Not the infrastructure program that we had 40, 50 years ago, which was just roads and bridges. Sure, we need that, but we need, full access to broadband. The digital divide has been massively exposed by this crisis. We need the next generation energy grid. There's so many positive things that if we actually made some basic investments in, it would not only help people in the short term, but it would put us on a whole different trajectory. So that to me is the mandate: common ground solutions, first for relief, second to support working families through this post-COVID transition, and then third, thinking long-term about how do we build that economy of the future for the benefit of the next generation.
Yeah, but part of the reality, because you laid it out there very, very precisely, and we need more John Delaney's in Congress to sort of get that point and kind of move the ball along that reality. But the reality still remains that we're going to walk into a new term for the Congress, a new administration, where you have these big issues like infrastructure. You've got the idea that the BPC is supporting and trying to help massage, expanding the child tax credit, strengthening the Pell Grant program, and things like that. How do we begin to move the leadership? And by that, I don't just mean specifically a Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi. I mean the leadership, because all of these men and women are leaders. How do we begin to move them in a way that I think touches on a lot of getting stuff done, particularly when you start to look at, you still have this racial inequality piece that has to be addressed, that you still have these other very important and driving social issues that are beneath the surface,
Right.
The racial impact on the economy, the racial impact on healthcare, the racial impact on infrastructure, how my neighborhood gets fixed versus how your neighborhood gets fixed. And so what I'm looking at is, and where I think the BPC is going to play such an important role, is helping members, helping leaders move into that space safely.
Yes, I agree.
Without the partisan elbows just kind of edging them out and the knives that come out from the special interests. There is real value in that. And I think to a lot of the points you've made, that's what the American people are looking for right now. They're looking for a leader.
They're dying for it.
Yeah, no.
And it's like an oasis in the desert. If they see it, they're like, why can't we have this all the time? Which is why, I was in business before I entered public service, and I used to say that the best business deals are ones where everyone feels a little bad when they're done. And the BPC and all of us have to be supportive of that mentality, which is you're not going to get everything you want. You may have to start smaller on some of these things than people want, but we have to start notching progress, right? We have to kind of wake up every day and say, did we make progress today? And the only way, we all know this, and if this last election should remind everyone of this, the only way you're going to make progress in the federal government of the United States is by finding bipartisan support, by definition.
That's it.
So unless you can sit across the table and say, I can attract someone from the other side of the aisle on my proposal, unless you can say that, then you got to get out of the room. Because having ideas that have no chance of getting any support are not what this country needs. They're not what working families need. And that's what has to really, that's where the BPC through the Solution Summit and everything else they do all year long with their rich content of ideas and the creation of that safe space for convening of members on both sides of the aisle to have that kind of conversation. Because you and I both know there's a lot of common ground.
Yeah,
and
there
it
is.
can be found. But people
And the
need to be
frustration,
put off in a very difficult system.
I was going to say, the frustration is when people just want to, actively ignore that foundation of common ground.
Right.
And good ideas are left to die on the vine because there was not one brave soul to say, why don't I just pick up the phone and call the BPC and see if they can help me on this? Because
Right.
we can, and we have been that bridge for countless members on the Hill. We are a safe space. It's okay. It's okay. You can get your bipartisan on and not feel guilty about it.
BPC is a blessing to this kind of a process, right? Because you can't do it without these kind of organizations.
That's exactly right. So, well, it is always a pleasure when I get to hang with this brother, and he's a lot of fun. I got to know John before he got to Congress, and he was looking at running for another office back in the day. I think I was still state chairman when the first time we talked. And
you were, and our mutual friend Peter Terpelek introduced us.
That's right. That's right. God bless Peter.
May he rest in peace.
Amen. And again, just a good example, folks. I'm in a very blue state of Maryland, and John was a representative in that blue state. But we got to work together and we got along. It can be done. It's okay, and we're very happy for the good work that the Bipartisan Policy Center is doing, and especially this week with the summit, where they're touching on a lot of hot button, yes, but important issues. And we're just very glad to have been a part of it. Jason, I throw this back to you, my friend. I thank you again for your leadership of the BPC, and it's an honor, and if I may speak for my friend here, to be on the board to work and serve with you.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us for the kickoff of our Solution Summit. I think we're off to a very good start. Let me just share with you what's coming up next. Tomorrow, we have a terrific session talking about the efforts we have underway to support children and families. We're going to have a leadoff discussion with Senator Rick Santorum and Dr. Leanna Wen. That'll be moderated by BPC's Chief Operating Officer, Kelly Darnell. And then the director of our early childhood work, Linda Smith, is going to be taking us through some specifics about our recommendations. And let me also just make the point, and I think those of you who know BPC know this well, we don't write studies to make ourselves feel good. We don't have the hubris to hit print and think that we've changed the world. We are interested in building a coalition of passionate, committed, evidence-driven people who can work together to support the members of Congress who want to get something done. We strongly believe that democracy is the world's greatest team sport, and we know that momentum matters. The ability of this country to get back on its feet is going to be determined by whether our government can come together early next year and put some wins on the board. That is what we are seeking to describe in this document, and that is the effort that we hope you all work with us on very, very soon. Thank you.